Hey guys, welcome back. We are going to get back to posting videos every other Friday. I've just been really busy with everything. For this last video on tides, I want to talk about how the tide influences trout interaction with the structure on the beach. I've got a simple drawing here, as I usually do. This is under the water. This is the dry shoreline. You got like a log you might find and a few rocks that one might find on a typical cutthroat beach. In a lot of places in the Sound, a lot of cutthroat beaches, and in many tides, there isn't a lot of lateral flow that's discernible. The tide is falling and then is rising without a great deal of lateral movement. When this is happening in any given tide, when there's a general absence of lateral flow, the trout move around the shoreline. As we've already established, a lot of times they're hunting in here in this, but they're using structure to create lateral ambush opportunity. If there is a critter on the shoreline, a trout may move in here, use this rock to conceal himself, and then attack at speed around this rock. He may do the same thing with wood, or rocks out in deeper water. He's going to, or more likely she is going to, use this structure to conceal themselves from prey on the opposite side, using this structure and all angles, all sides of this structure, to kind of patrol their little area. Nice. And to create, opportunities for predation. This is a common way that they interact with the structure on the beach, and it's very straightforward and intuitive. Once you see it, it makes sense what they're doing. A lot of times you'll see trout, if you're able to see them, they'll be tucked in, right along the bottom, right along the corner. Oftentimes orienting themselves where they can make small movements and check one side or check the other side, and they'll just kind of almost figure eight or do circles or whatever they need to do to patrol a particular rock or a particular area. This is all very different, though, when the tide does start to create lateral movement on the shoreline. When that happens, the way that trout interact with this physical structure really fundamentally changes. Okay. They're still interacting with the physical structure, but let's just say that the water is moving this direction. Well, in that case, you're going to have these lines of current seams, high pressure meeting low pressure, just like you would in a river. Something like this, a current seam isn't going to come straight off this tip of the rock because it's got this rock creating this little high pressure, so that's going to influence it, and it's going to kind of push back up here, and these two are going to meet. Now, I'm assuming, for the sake of this drawing, that this is fairly good flow. You're going to have a nice little current seam, kind of like this, coming off here. This rock might have a current seam kind of tucking in there, one tucking up in here, and you're also going to have high pressure pillows right here. This tree is going to have a fairly turbulent current seam. When this starts to happen, when there starts to get lateral flow along the shoreline, the first thing that happens is the fish all orient themselves into the current. Obvious. Secondly, and most importantly, they stop generally using the structure on the beach for lateral ambush opportunities, and they start to use the physical features created by the rocks and the structure, trees, the physical features of the water. We may not think of a pillow or a current seam as a physical structure, but the trout certainly feel them that way and interact with them as if they themselves are physical structure. So the trout, instead of hanging out on this side here or this side here, they're going to hang out in this seam. Whether in the front or the back of it, it's going to be a balance for the opportunity to eat whatever's coming this way and to be in a dominant place so that other trout don't get to the food first. Some of these beaches are going to have a few trout. Some of them will have a lot of trout. The more trout there are, the closer they will be to the further up in these seams will they be. And the more trout will try to occupy this pillow space. However, the seams are most desirable. So keeping that in mind, let's look at it in a different way a little bit here, kind of profile view. Let's say that I've got the beach and there's a rock right here. Okay. And on this rock, there's a nice pillow that's going to be about here. It's going to come up like that, and then it's going to dissipate, and then it's going to have a general seam back here, like this. Let's say, for the sake of argument right now, that the tide height is, right now it's here. It's right at the top of this rock. Well, this whole space behind the rock, top to bottom, presents a nice pressure wall that we call a current seam, where there's, let's say that we're looking at kind of this rock and this rock are the same, but it's about this deep. There's higher pressure here, there's lower pressure here as the water's moving around it, and high pressure here in the slow water where it's not. And these walls created back here trap food. They're just trapped there and tumbles around, and it gives the trout opportunity, just like in a river. In the same way, a trout will hang out here or hang out up here to take advantage of this splitting water that's going around the rock. And as it slows down, it's going to be a higher pressure. He can just sit there. But let's say that the tide, he can just sit there and feed. Well, as the tide rises, this lower pressure here continues above the rock. And actually, believe it or not, this seam will rise up like this a little bit. But it doesn't extend much above the rock. So if I am fishing a good beach, a good cutty beach, and it has good structure like this, but the water's on, let's say it's a good strong flooding tide and it's moving pretty good. Let's say it doesn't have to be fast. Let's just say it's moving at 2 or 3 knots. That's going to be fast enough to create these physical structures of seams and pillows in the water that the trout are going to focus on to feed. I need to get my fly into this lower zone to present it into the trout's like predatory window in view. They don't really want to leave these seams, because then they have to work harder in the general flow of the water to hold still and to get a good feeding position than they do if they're just simply in the feeding seam. I know this is probably intuitive for you and straightforward, but if you haven't done a lot of tidal fishing, it may not be. It's important to recognize when there's enough lateral flow. If you're walking along the beach and there are pieces of seaweed or any kind of debris that's moving at the same pace that you are, there's enough lateral flow on that beach to create seams and pillows around the structure that the trout are going to focus on. If you're in a boat and you're drifting along and you can see the shoreline at about a walking pace going past you, you have enough flow to that it's creating current seams and pillows that the trout are going to focus on. When that happens, I'm no longer just generally casting to the beach, nor am I casting on generally just casting around structure. I'm casting upstream and specifically downstream of structure. The upstream structure, the upstream pillows are going to be a lot closer to the structure than the downstream seams. The downstream seams are going to collect more food and offer more opportunity to the fish. Recognizing, conversely, when there is not a lot of lateral flow, I am going to generally throw the fly close to shore on both sides of any structure, in between structure, around all sides, looking for fish that are trying to create lateral predation opportunities, or find lateral predation opportunities. One thing I'm not doing in either case, though, is throwing the fly on top of the rocks. In either case, I don't want to throw my fly on top of the rocks or on top of logs. Obviously, I don't want to get my fly stuck, but it really diminishes the opportunity, the visual window for them to see the fly. You want to put your fly on the side. Doesn't matter what side if there's not a lot of flow. You might want to put it, land it on the back, pull it around, land it in the front, pull it out, land it on the, a little bit farther outside, land it on this side. And you might take 3 casts around a rock and catch a fish on the 4th and be like, what the heck? It's just putting it in their face in the right moment. But really, anytime there's flow, you need to change the way that you think about fishing the structure and specifically target upstream and downstream. Specifically downstream. If it's a really big, long rock, or if there's a collection of rocks, the turbulent water and seams downstream are going to hold drifting food there longer, and more trout will congregate. Furthermore, you need to keep in mind that the trout in moderate lateral current, obviously high, but anything greater than moderate lateral current, are all going to be oriented the same way. That means you want to get your fly always downstream so that you're always pulling it away from them. Even if you're on the downstream side, you don't want to be casting upstream and pulling it into their faces. We'll get into that later on. But anytime you're fishing a beach, pay attention to the tidal exchange, right? And keep notes on tidal exchange rate, heights and differences, all that kind of stuff. And tailor your presentation to whether or not you're focusing on lateral ambush in the actual physical structure on the beach, or whether you're presenting to the trout an opportunity for something to be brought to them in the current, using seams and pillows to your advantage. One last thing I'll say, and this is probably going to be a whole nother video, but when I'm fishing high flow beaches, a great way to find fish, just like in a river, is to nymph. Put on 2 nymphs and drift them around structure. It'll give you a longer presentation in the water. You can put the fly right where you want it, get it down into the zone and drift it right along. If you put really bright stuff, like I'll tie a pink stonefly and a San Juan worm and drift them, I can see them. I can watch how they interact, and I can watch where they pause and where they accelerate in the water, and that tells me where the trout are more likely to hold. Even if I don't catch fish on a particular day, I'll at least know how the current interacts with that rock or with that submerged log or whatever it is. So it's not always just about streamer fishing. Throw a nymph in there sometimes. Throw a dead drifted dry fly. Toss a stimulator out there. It really works. Anyways, Hope this is helpful, guys, and you'll see more of me as time goes on. Thanks for tuning in. See you.